Okay, so this morning I'm going to be interviewing Simon Mann. Good morning, Simon. Thank you very much for talking to me today.
Good morning.
Good morning. So, Simon, first of all, you served in the Scots Guards. What was the step up from the army like to the SAS?
Well, the SAS is part of the army, although it doesn't really think of it as such.
Yeah.
And it's obviously it's a massive step up and hugely different in pretty much every respect.
Yeah. And what was the sort of worst bit about the SAS training?
I really enjoyed the training, actually. And I think sort of eating vile things on combat survival was pretty tiresome thing.
Yeah, no, I bet.
I didn't enjoy that at
That's
all.
disgusting.
And I suppose being more serious about it, the jungle phase of the training is hard.
I bet it's very tough. And how long is the training? How long does the process take?
Well, I'm not sure what they do now. I mean, remember, we're talking about something an incredibly long time ago. But you do selection, which is 3 or 4 weeks, depending. And then you do what is called continuation, which is basically 6 months before you finally get badged at the end of those 6 months.
Yeah.
So you actually do selection and pass selection, and then do those 6 months before you get what we call badged.
Okay.
And the continuation ends with what by that stage seems like an absolute holiday, which is going on the parachuting course.
I bet it does. The slightly more fun part.
Well, it's just,
maybe not fun.
It's relative compared with what you've just done for the previous 6 months. It's very easy.
Yeah. And would you say it's easier to get into the SAS now than it was in the sort of 70s and 80s?
No, I think it's. I mean, firstly, there's always been a difference between officers and soldiers in terms of SAS selection. In that, officers have to do what is called Officers' Week, which is a very different sort of kettle of fish to the selection. But the actual test week of SAS selection hasn't changed. I mean, it hasn't changed in, I don't know, 60 years. I'm not sure when the present selection format of selection began, but that hasn't changed for a very long time. And what that does is, and everybody does the same one, officers and soldiers, and it hasn't changed. And that is actually the point, because, for example, if I meet somebody in a pub and they say, yeah, well, I was in the SAS, and, you know, and immediately, firstly, you don't actually believe them.
Yeah.
Because there are an awful lot of people who say that, or seem to say that, when actually it's not really fully true. When I say fully true, what I mean is, for example, they might have been in the TA, the Territorials, or they might have been a driver at Hereford, but were they actually badged SAS? Anyway, so that can very quickly be established by a couple of questions. And now, I mean, the guy I'm talking to, I may not even rate him as within the terms of the conversation. If it's a business conversation, I may not, think he's not somebody I want to deal with. But the point is about selection is that the two of us have this yardstick in common. We both know exactly what the other person has done in order to get into the SAS. And that yardstick is very useful, because it basically means that the person you're dealing with, whether they're very clever, very honourable, or the exact opposite, they do have something in them that allows them to push themselves on their own extremely hard over a period of time. And not everybody has that, But I mean, it's no big deal. I mean, it's like, well, some people are never going to be great pianists. me for one.
And me.
But, you know, like, so what? That doesn't, I don't lie in bed at night worrying about the fact I'm not a great pianist. So it doesn't matter. It's just different people are different, you know.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. So can you explain to us a little bit about how the African government would commission mercenaries to help?
Well,
I mean, in sort of as simple terms
yeah.
as you can.
Yeah, sure. Normally it only happens when they're in terrible trouble. I mean, this is not something they do lightly, because, you know, like anywhere, like in the United States or here, basically everything a government does is primarily all about being re-elected. You know, it's domestic politics at the end of the day. And hiring mercenaries or private military contractors, as they might be called, is never going to be popular within a country, and is also is a target for all sorts of people to criticize that government. So basically, a government is only going to do that if they are in real trouble. And it's quite interesting, actually, if you look at the situation in Mozambique today, where they are flirting with this, and I use that expression advisedly, they are flirting with the use of outside people, and you know, all sorts of goings on are taking place, which basically illustrate my point. You know, this is not something any government would do lightly. So, for example, in my case, I mean, the only reason I got involved in this was because I was with an oil and gas company, with Tony Buckingham, Heritage Oil and Gas, and we were involved with Angola in 1992, and UNITA, General Savimbi, went back to war. Illegally, improperly, against all the treaties he'd signed, the promises he'd made. He'd even made that promise that he wouldn't go back to war to Lord Steele, David Steele, with me sitting next to him. I was David Steele's bag carrier at a meeting with General Savimbi for 2 hours and 1 aide. There were only 4 of us in the meeting. And he said, we are not going to go back to war. We're just not going to do that. Well, they did do that. And that's why Tony and I got involved, because that immediately torpedoed our business. And I said to Tony, well, you know, this is illegal and a horrific act on the part of UNITA. And why should they be allowed to attack our business? Because the first thing they did was attack us in a place called Soyo on the mouth of the River Congo. And so we then offered to the MPLA government of Angola at the time that we would help them, that we would retake Soyo with a bunch of South Africans, 100 South Africans, and with the Angolan armed forces as well. So we would basically lead an attack to retake Soyo. And the MPLA were desperate. I mean, they were losing a war. They'd been taken by surprise because UNITA had gone back to war in the way they had. They were losing it. And, you know, I mean, had UNITA won, these guys would have ended up probably hung from lampposts, you know, in Luanda. So they were desperate. And so they said, okay, well, we'll go with what you've suggested. We'll pay you to do this. So that's when Tony and I became generals in the Angolan army.
Yeah, God. Oh, dear.
Yeah, no, it's a bit strange. And some of my English friends will say, well, you know, Simon, for Angolan general, that's a bit like being a corporal in the Royal Corps of Transport, isn't it? And I say, well, yeah, if you like. But on the other hand, this war had been going on more or less for 30 years. And I was a general at the time when it was won by us. So you know. So put that in your pipe.
Yeah, exactly. Quite right. So are you able to tell us in sort of as easy terms as possible the events that took place in the lead up to your arrest?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I was recruited by Eli Khalil in early 2003 to basically replace President Obiang, who is still the president of Equatorial Guinea today, in fact, to replace him with an interim president, designate a guy called Severo Moto, who is an exile living in Spain. And on the basis that Equatorial Guinea was a tyranny, an evil tyranny with very bad things going on there, and that this would therefore be a very good thing to do for the people of Equatorial Guinea. Severo Moto himself, the guy who we would have put in, had been elected as mayor of Malibu, the capital, very popular man. He had been imprisoned, no trial in Equatorial Guinea. He'd then been released with a pardon at the request of the Pope and King Carlos of Spain. So he was the right kind. He was a trained Catholic priest, a very good guy, and therefore very much the right kind of guy to put in as a interim president to replace what was perceived as a very nasty tyranny. So I agreed that this was a good idea, and then we set about gaining information on Equatorial Guinea, because one of the things I wanted to know was, well, is it a terrible tyranny? Because we're not going to believe what we're being told. So we did do that. We sent a party of 10 guys into Equatorial Guinea who more or less lived there for 10 years. For 1 year, which was that 1 year in the lead up to our attempt. In that time, Eli Khalil basically failed to do what he had to do, which was come up with the money to pay me to go and do the job. And that led to a series of okay, we're going, no, sorry, we're not going. We're going, we're not going. And of course that's impossible, especially with mercenaries, because they can't just sit around waiting for the job, because you're basically saying you're hired, you're not hired, you're hired, you're not hired. And the same was true of the aircraft we needed and the air crew. So we had a huge security problem. And at the same time, so the year ran out, and we had a massive time problem, because Spain, the Prime Minister of Spain at the time was a guy called Aznar. You may remember him, Conservative Prime Minister. He had promised Eli Khalil, who was my boss in the chain of command, that Spain would give a new government in Equatorial Guinea, us having done our thing, so to speak, Spain would give that new government, interim government, international recognition. Now, if you're going to do a coup, you have to worry about international recognition. Children, do not try and do a coup without international recognition organized in advance, because that is a good way of ending up on the end of a rope at the bottom of a lamppost as well. Because if you're not internationally recognized, the country can do nothing. There's no government. It's just a guaranteed mess. So Spain had promised Eli Khalil, or Aznar, Prime Minister Aznar had promised Eli Khalil, that if we did the regime change in the right way, then he would give international recognition. And because Spain is the ex-colonial power, that becomes a very important matter with the EU, the African Union, and with the United States. They will all look to the old colonial power to say, well, is this the right thing? And so that was absolutely crucial. And the problem was that I think on the 14th of March, this is now 2004, Spain had a general election, which Aznar was going to resign at that point, regardless of whether his party won or lost. So he was saying to Eli, apparently, I mean, obviously I wasn't talking to him directly, but he was saying to Eli Khalil, look, guys, you've got to go, because I can't give you this international recognition the day before I resign, or 2 days before. That's just going to look crazy. So we had this timeline. So we were running out of time, and at the same time we'd run out of money because Eli Khalil had not come up with the money that he should have. He'd come up with some, but so basically we got very low. In flying terms, we got low and slow, which is not a good combination.
No.
We got low and slow, and we had the security thing was completely blown. Everybody knew a lot of people knew what was happening. South African intelligence agencies, Portuguese, Spanish, just to name three. And I'm absolutely certain the French, the British, and the Americans also had a pretty good idea what was going on. So that was how we ended up being, completely blown and arrested in Harare. But it's worth saying here that at the time, Mbeki was the president of South Africa. And 2 hours before our arrests, he was still saying, no, this is okay, this should go ahead. And we actually know that from people who investigated the whole situation in South Africa. I know the chief policeman. Now, I didn't know, well, I met him in prison, actually. He came to interrogate me, but I've met him since. And yeah, so it was sort of, we were almost an official operation. But of course, once it goes wrong, there's nothing official about it.
No. How awful, God.
Yeah, no, not good.
No,
but I mean, I never complained about it because, I mean, if you try and do something like this, then obviously there's going to be a big downside if it goes wrong.
Yeah.
And I mean, quite honestly, if I'd had to bet beforehand, and if somebody had said, well, what's likely to happen if this does go wrong, I think I'd have said, well, it probably death.
So you knew what you were.
Well, as it turned out, I was very lucky.
Yeah, you were. So when and how did you first meet Mark Thatcher?
Oh, well, Mark lived in Cape Town, and we lived in Cape Town. We went down to live down there in '97, and we had mutual friends. And I mean, where we'd rented our house was, I think, about 400 yards away from where Mark's house was. So our mutual friend introduced us, and we became quite chummy. We used to have dinner at theirs. They'd come to us.
How did you find him? How did you find him?
Mark, a strange guy. I mean, he had a good side and a very kind side, actually, which I saw in action, and quite a bright guy, in fact, contrary to popular belief. But something lacking there, something not there, which he really revealed to me, because he should have supported me when I was in prison.
Absolutely.
Which he completely failed to do. So as far as I'm concerned, when push came to shove, he didn't.
Yeah, no, fair enough. And Simon, so what was prison like in Zimbabwe? I'm sure it was appalling.
Not nice.
I'm sure.
No, it's Chikurubi Maximum Security. It's called the Harare Hilton. And I think it was built for 1,500 prisoners. And when I was there, it had 3,500 prisoners. And apparently could be smelt from 6 kilometers away.
Oh, for goodness sake.
Because there was no water. A lot of the time there was very little water. So it was just a ghastly experience, and frightening, obviously. Very frightening, because, a country like Zimbabwe, and the country was going down the tube, and you're kind of sitting there and you're in an extremely unpleasant regime, a criminal tyranny, and the country's in a death spiral, and you just think, well, the last people they're going to look after is their prisoners. I mean, this place is absolutely beep, 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 beep. And they're not going to care about us.
No.
And I mean, that was the really nasty feeling. And I remember one night, a guard who I was quite friendly with, he came to outside my cell. He was on night watch, so it was sort of like in the middle of the night. And he said, Shumba, how many people do you think are on duty tonight? How many guards do you think there are actually here on duty in this prison in the middle of the night? But 3,500 people, many of whom expect to die in the prison, because that is what happens. A lot of people, I mean, 20 people a day were dying.
Oh, wow.
And I said, well, what do you mean, 20, 30? What do you mean? And he said, there are 3 guards on duty.
3, between 3,500.
And actually that really frightened me, because I thought there are a lot of desperate people in here. Now, if they try and pull something, which they could very easily do, if they realize there are only 3 guards, the army, because the army was outside, there were 100 troops outside, either pretty good troops of the Zimbabwe, and they would just come in shooting. They wouldn't hesitate. They'd just open fire. If there was a serious mass breakout attempt or a big riot, they would just come in and shoot. And I thought, well, that is really scary, because it's highly likely.
Yeah.
So it was a terrible experience.
Yeah.
And I mean, it was weird, because at the beginning, when I first got there, when I was first arrested, I was always in a maximum security section within the prison, so quite a small section. And if, for example, the broom that we swept the yard with was, had fallen to pieces and it was completely worn out, we'd tell the yard sergeant and show him the broom. And he'd say, well, get another one. And we'd get one of the younger prisoners, give him the old broom, and tell him to go down to the stores and get a new one. That was a bit like the army, really. Exchange your broom. By the end, there were no brooms. There were simply no brooms. And we were asking the guards if they would collect some, grass, straw, that we could make a broom out of, just to keep the yard swept. So in the space of those 4 years, we'd gone from sort of having a semi-working structure to having no structure at all. So people didn't have clothes. Prisoners didn't have clothing. They just didn't have any clothes to wear. So they'd have a sort of very old worn blanket wrapped around them instead of a uniform. I mean, the guards didn't have, the guards' uniform was all falling to pieces and was sewn up 100 times, and their boots were falling to pieces. I mean,
was it very violent in there?
No.
No.
The only violence, really, I mean, there were incidents. There were incidents of violence, but it wasn't very violent. It wasn't like you read about, for example, South American prisons, where people are being stabbed left, centre and right, and, it's sort of gang law within the prison. There's a bit of that, but not so much. African culture is much gentler than that, I think.
Yeah, yeah.
Much kinder.
And were there many foreigners in there? Did you sort of make any surprising friendships?
Well, I mean, I made friendships, certainly.
Yes.
I mean, you do, because it's such an extreme situation that there is a lot of sort of love, really, is the best way of describing it, between you all, because you're really up against it. And so people tend to sort of, look after one another, basically.
Yeah.
And there were very few white people in the prison. I mean, when we were arrested, I had 60 men with me, 10 of whom were white, and the rest were black. But they were all ex-Executive Outcomes, which was the company that I'd been in on the beginning of, which had done the Angolan War, then the Sierra Leone War, and then various other things. And so all those guys were ex-Executive Outcomes.
Yeah.
But they all left after either a year or 18 months, depending, including the air crew. My air crew on the Boeing 727 Uh, they stayed for 18 months. So after 18 months, there was none of my men there in that prison in Zim, which was a relief that they were all out for me. But obviously that meant that I had none of my guys there. There were a couple of other white people, but they were not anywhere near me. I never saw them. I sort of knew about them, or I might have seen them in the distance if I was outside of the section for some reason, which was very rare. And then my friends were the guys I was in the section with. And some of them came from South Africa. There were two in South Africa. But the rest were all Zimbabweans.
Okay, and then you were incarcerated in Black Beach prison.
That was my next prison.
Equatorial Guinea, and was that even worse?
Well, I suppose it was worse, really. I mean, it was difficult because I was kidnapped out of Chickarooby. They didn't extradite me. They basically kidnapped me and then smuggled me to Equatorial Guinea. And I thought on arrival, I'd be shot. I thought that literally I'd step off the plane, and that as soon as I would touch the ground, I thought, well, that's it. They're just going to, when my foot touches Equatorial Guinean soil, there's going to be a bang, and that's going to be the end. That's going to be the end of me. Then we got over that. We did a 3-month interrogation, when basically it wasn't meant to go on for 3 months. It did go on for 3 months because what they were trying to do, what the Equatorial Guineans were trying to do, was they'd worked out that it doesn't matter how good you are, you're not going to take over a whole country with 60 men.
Yeah, no.
I mean, it's just not possible.
No.
There has to be something else going on as well. And the something else, ideally, is going to be a palace coup. So in other words, the night of your arrival, with your 60 men and the new president designate, that night, the existing president is going to be arrested in his bed. There's going to be a palace coup. And they'd worked out that that must have been the real plan, which indeed it was. So what they really wanted to know, like any security situation, is, well, who are the traitors? Who are the traitors inside the palace? Because they must be still there. The palace coup didn't happen. These guys were arrested in Zimbabwe. So that button wasn't pressed, but the traitors are still here. Who are they? Who are they?
Yeah.
Now, in my interrogation, I realized what was happening. But I didn't know who these people were. So it's like somebody had given me an old-fashioned airplane ticket, that all I had to do was fill out the names and the details, and I'd fly home.
Yeah.
But I didn't know the details.
How awful.
Because I mean, it was very funny, so they said, right, your enemies, because Eli Khalil, Gary Hashem, Mark Thatcher, and another guy, Karim Falaha, these were the people who had completely betrayed me, in the sense that once we'd been arrested, they should have moved heaven and earth to help me. And not just to help me, but to help my men and my men's families. Because, there's no welfare in South Africa. So, $1,000 to each family would have made a huge difference, not only to them, but to me. Because I was being attacked at one point physically in prison by my own men, saying, what the hell are you doing? Where's the money? Why are we not being looked after? Why are our families not being looked after? Who is going to pay for our legal fees to get us out of here, etc., etc., etc. So those guys, Eli Khalil, Mark, Gary Hashem, Karim, they should have been supporting me, or supporting even my family, the families of the men, but they didn't. So by the time I got to Equatorial Guinea, I thought, right, you guys are the enemy now. And of course, they also were the enemy of Equatorial Guinea. So I said, right, well, let's negotiate. I'm going to help you as best I can against these people because they are my enemy now. But I need a deal. I want a written deal. I want a lawyer here to say, if I give you the X, Y, and Z information and we manage to, do what you want to do, then you're going to let me out. And the guy said that he was the Attorney General of the country and the Minister of Security was the other one, General Manuel, who I got to know very well, both of them. And they said, man, we don't negotiate with terrorists. And I laughed. And they said, why is that funny? And I said, because I'm a British officer.
Yeah.
I was an intelligence officer and I was in the Special Air Service. We always negotiate with terrorists. Look at the history. You always end up negotiating with terrorists.
Yeah.
And anyway, they didn't find that at all funny. So there was no deal. There was no lawyer. I just had to help them anyway.
Yeah. God. And a typical day in prison
in Equatorial Guinea.
Yeah, I mean,
I was in solitary confinement, strict solitary confinement. So I had a strict routine. I mean, but that was my own routine.
Yeah, probably helped your sanity slightly.
No, very much so. Yeah, I sort of devised this structure to try and stay sane and in one piece. And the structure was basically routine, exercise, something artistic, and keeping a log, keeping a note that I had done my routine, I had done my exercise, and I had done something artistic.
Yeah.
And that was my four-legged stool or whatever.
That was your sort of coping strategy, really.
It was, yeah.
And apart from when you first set foot on Equatorial Guinea, did you fear for were there other times in your time in prison where you really feared for your life?
Yeah, actually all the time, until my trial in Equatorial Guinea. Because until that point, until they had actually, because after I'd been in Equatorial Guinea about 5 months, there was another trial. And that's when they gave me 32 years. Until that point, it's Africa, it's very uncertain. There's all sorts of politics going on within their structure. Up to that point, there was a real possibility, because I had to plead guilty in my trial. And all the way up until that point, they could have turned around and said, right, the punishment is death. So they gave, pleading guilty was a bit of a problem. I said, well, what am I going to plead guilty to? Well, first of all, I said, why am I going to have to plead guilty? Because by this time, my interrogation had gone very well, in the sense that I had helped them a lot. And they said, look, we promised to help you. We didn't say you'd get a pardon. We didn't give you any kind of promise. But we did say that if you helped us, we'd do our best to help you. Now what we want you to do, you've helped us in the interrogation phase. Now what we want you to do is help us at the trial phase. I said, okay, how does that work? And they said, well, we want you to plead guilty. I said, plead guilty to what? And they said, attempted murder, attempted assassination of a head of state, and attempted acts of international terrorism.
God, very hard thing to.
And I said, wait, hold on a second. You want me to plead guilty to that? And my joke is, they said yes, and parking on a double yellow line. But and I just thought, oh, well, now what? And I just thought about it, and I thought, you've come this far, and all the time, the firing squad or the gallows has been hanging over you. You have helped them. But then I did have a sort of a relationship with them, I felt. And I thought, well, you just got to keep going. You've just got to gamble and hope that, you know, these guys are honorable, and that this will work. So I just said, well, okay, I'll plead guilty, which I did.
Yeah, yeah. And it worked.
It worked. But they gave me 32 years. And then the funny bit was they said, after they'd given me 32 years, which was not what I expected. You know, I didn't expect that they were going to say 32 years. I feared they might say you're going to be shot. But I also was hoping that it would be like 5 years or 10 years to make it easier for the president to sort of, you know, get me out of that. Because by this time I felt I had a relationship with him, although I'd never met him. And they said, okay, well, you've got 32 years, and for a further 14 years after the 32 years, you're not allowed to revisit Equatorial Guinea.
God.
And I just thought, oh, wow, that's terrible.
How awful.
After another 32 years, I thought, oh, my God, I'm going to be dead. I'm not going to make it 32 years. It's a weird thing to put on the end there.
Very weird.
But so once I got that sentence, then I knew, well, at least they're not going to take me out and shoot me. But of course, 32 years was going to kill me anyway, because the conditions there are, I mean, it's incredibly hot in Ecuador. It's the terrible climate. And they've got terrible malaria. I wasn't taking proper exercise because I was always in my cell. And, you know, I just knew I wasn't going to make it.
You must have been wasting away.
But but I also knew that if I didn't get out pretty soon, if I didn't get home pretty soon, I wouldn't have a home to get out to. You know, it's too long.
Yeah.
By then I would have been in prison for nearly 5 years. And I didn't know. I had no idea what they were actually going to do. You know, another 5 years would have probably killed me. So that was going on all the time.
And how did your poor wife and children cope? I mean, it must have been absolutely appalling.
Yeah, I think they had probably a worse time than I did in some ways.
Yeah.
Because at least, I think often when you do these things first person, it's fine. And if you're the family, it's maybe harder.
Yeah.
I think, for example, you know, when, well, I mean, in my case, you know, when I went to Northern Ireland, I think, you know, I thought it was great. I was 20 and I thought this is terrific. My poor mother was sort of having
complete flip.
Sure. You know? Yeah. So I think very often it is harder for people at home than people actually doing it.
Yeah, yeah. So people, you know, what everyone's going through today with this pandemic and having to shield or self-isolate. I mean, you've been comparing it to your time. I mean, surely it's not, it's not a patch.
Well, I've tried to avoid comparison.
Yeah.
Because there is no comparison. So the spin that I've been putting on these webinars that I've been doing, I've got a website that promotes me as a coach or a mentor, but also it's offering a free checklist for dealing with this. I have it here.
Brilliant.
Yes.
I downloaded one.
Yeah. Which is actually meant to actually prompt more questions than it is to give answers in a way. Because the idea is that you use the checklist and then you come to the free webinar and we can talk about these things. And there is no comparison, obviously. There's some similarities maybe, but there's no comparison. And the idea is not to start sort of swapping notes on how tough anybody is or how clever I am or anything to have survived that. The idea is to try and say, okay, well, I did learn some lessons which don't come naturally. And maybe talking about those things that I learned with people who are either nervous or frightened or finding it all very difficult, maybe those things can help them. I mean, you know, it's not that ambitious really, but I think it does help some people.
Definitely. And what are you doing today? Now all that awful stuff is behind you.
What you mean, prison? Prison?
Yes. Now that prison and everything's behind you, and moving forward, you do talks. What else?
Well, I mean, I've done a bit of speaking, writing, coaching, mentoring, which I really enjoy. I really like it. And I actually have a sort of track record in it because I worked at the Leadership Trust, Leadership Trust Ross-on-Wye.
Yes.
Richard Westbury, and Richard Bethel as was. Do you know who I mean?
Yes. Yeah.
He owns it, and I used to work there in the 80s with Richard, and that gave me a very good introduction into that world of leadership training, but in a very practical way, and helping people develop that side of themselves, which I think is really interesting and actually is very important. It's not, leadership gets kicked around as such a terrible sort of buzzword, and has all sorts of sort of connotations, I think, of sort of army leadership, for people blowing whistles and climbing out of trenches, and all sorts of sort of business school gobbledygook, which I think is really hopeless, basically. And I think I can say that because I think I probably had more formal leadership training and given more formal leadership training than most people would ever want to do. And I've actually done a lot of leadership. And I think it's like riding a bicycle. You can read as many books as you like about riding bicycles. You won't be able to ride one.
Till you do it.
Till you do it. And you learn how to do it.
Yeah.
There is no, you can't learn that balancing act by reading a book. So you have to do it.
Yeah.
And you can teach, you can show people. And the Leadership Trust is very much built around they do an LM course. It's called Leadership and Management, and it's designed for junior management, and it's a brilliant course. But what it absolutely, at its core, what it does is it shows you that to be a leader of any sort, you have to have a very, very honest appreciation of yourself. I mean, a really honest one, and you have to be comfortable with yourself. And that is an honesty, like a core honesty, which I think actually kind of radiates. And I don't think you have to be a leader with a capital L and inverted commas. What you have to be is honest with yourself, and that communicates to the people around you. And if you're in a situation where either they look to you for leadership, or you want to tell them what to do in some way, that honesty is your passport. That is what allows you, because they will trust you.
Yeah.
And they're like the old saying, the village is never wrong. There is a sort of group sense. And if somebody's kidding themselves, they're not going to be trusted. And yeah, we may do what they say because we have to. But when push comes to shove, it's not going to work.
No.
And so and if you consider leadership in that way, then parents are leading a family. A cricket team goes onto the pitch, the captain's the leader, yes, but it might be a team of nuclear scientists at CERN. Leadership is not that sort of I don't know what's the right word. It's trite. There's a trite view about leadership, which I think is very misleading.
Yeah. And would you ever get involved in African politics?
Well, I am involved in African politics because, believe it or not, I'm very friendly with the president of Equatorial Guinea, the guy I tried to overthrow.
Yes.
And I've been there a few times, and I spend time with him. and other countries in Africa are very friendly towards me. I mean, Africa's got a wonderful ability to forgive and move on.
Yeah.
I think they're much better at that than we are.
But have you forgiven?
Oh yeah, totally.
John, would you? It's amazing.
I've been to Zimbabwe. You know, I'm almost a celebrity in Zimbabwe, and also in Equatorial Guinea, and in South Africa. I mean, my book is a bestseller in South Africa. The book that came out in 2011, Cry Havoc, available on Amazon near you.
Yes, well, I'd like to promote that. I can promote that on Grapevine. And anyone who's listening to this, go and buy Cry Havoc.
Yeah. No, so I mean, very senior, you know, presidential level Africans have said, Simon, it's amazing to meet you because first of all, I can't believe that you had the balls to even think about doing what you tried to do. Mm. Secondly, how you survived our prisons, I don't know, because they're absolute hell. Yeah. And thirdly, how have you become friendly with the guy you tried to overthrow? How did you do that?
It is rather amazing.
And so they just want to meet me.
Yeah, I'm sure they do.
They don't want to have their photograph on the front page of their local paper with shaking my hand, because that's a bit of a no-no. You know, he's the white mercenary, and you can't possibly approve of white mercenary. But that's just the kind of that's the facade.
Yeah,
brilliant. The truth is, you know, that they actually want to sit down and have a chat.
Yeah, God, it's amazing. And it must have changed you in lots of ways, this whole ordeal. Do you think?
I don't think so.
No?
I mean, maybe that's very conceited, but I just don't think it did. I don't think it did, and Amanda doesn't think, well, my wife doesn't think it did. And I think she was hoping it might.
But you were the same.
but it doesn't. But it hasn't changed me. I mean, some things.
Good.
Like, you know, you come out of that experience and you think, wow, you know, now I'm like a sort of like a holy man. You know, I've been close to death, and I've been in solitary confinement, and no food, no water. And nothing is now going to faze me.
But do you appreciate life more? Do you appreciate the smaller things in life that maybe you took for granted in the past?
Actually, I mean, I have always tried to do that, and I think I always have, you know. But having thought that I'm like this sort of guru type, you know, fakir, holy man, I'm in a traffic jam and I get just as angry about the traffic jam and just as impatient and just as frustrated that I'm going to be late as anybody else.
Yeah.
Or as before I went to prison. So I
know.
How do you equate all of that? I don't know really. No. But I don't think I've changed. And now I work in Africa a lot. I'm involved with gold mining, artisanal small-scale gold management, helping governments deal with small-scale mining, which is fascinating.
Yeah.
Got some experience of the mining industry from the 90s, when Tony and I set up a mining company, and that's great. And my ability to kind of deal with Africans is very useful.
I'm sure, yeah. No, definitely. And finally, do you have a sort of a bucket list of places you really want to go that you haven't managed to go to yet?
Oh, God.
I don't know, places you want to see, places to go on holiday.
Yeah.
Anywhere to explore that you perhaps haven't?
I actually really don't like the idea of a bucket list, because I think that it can so easily be just a box ticking exercise. You know, been there, done that, been there, done that, been there, done that, got that t-shirt. And I think that's kind of the wrong attitude. And all my traveling, or most of it, it's always been for a purpose. It's been the job, or it's to go skiing, or to go mountain walking, or to go sailing. So for me, it's the activity that counts.
So you don't like lying on a beach doing?
Oh God, no, I'm terrible at lying on beaches.
Okay, no,
like in a few hours, we found something dangerous and stupid to do.
Yeah.
Or we're in the bar or something.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, fair enough. I think a lot of men are like that. Wives happier.
Why are women not like that? I've never quite got.
No, I like doing things, but I think my husband definitely gets impatient, and sort of wants to go and do something.
Yeah.
Bit of an adrenaline rush.
And my father was exactly the same. I mean, my mother would sort of say, well, let's go to, one year we ended up in Menorca. And I think it was a one-off because it was disaster, because my father and us boys were so badly behaved. Not really badly, but we swam from one bay to another, and they had to turn the lifeboat out because we were fine. But, they all got very worried. And then there was a cliff we were jumping off, and I don't know. And then we had a canoe, and there was a big storm, so we took the canoe out because we were used to, if the storm's big, that's great. That's when we get the canoe out.
It'll be more exciting.
Yes, and then we could go surfing on the big wave. That was the complete no-no. And by the end of it, my mother said, "Right, we're back to Scotland next year."
Oh dear.
More grouse.
Grouse and midges.
Yep.
Images. Simon, thank you so much for talking to me. It's been absolutely fascinating, and it's incredible what you've been through, and just hearing everything. Amazing story, and well done you. It's amazing.
Well, it's old hat now, and now I'm getting on with other things in Africa, which is great.
No, it's great. Thank you very, very much.